Welcome to NAIFA's Advisor Today podcast series, where we focus on how financial advisors work, live, and give to their local communities and our greater financial services industry. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, NAIFA Nation. This is Advisors Today's podcast with one of your co-hosts, Christopher Gandy, and I'm here with an astute group of individuals. I'm here with our wonderful other co-host, Suzanne Carawan. Hi, Suzanne.
Hey, Chris.
How are you doing? You're looking wonderful on today. It's Magnificent Monday, and I'm sure you're magically going to tell us all the wonderful things that NAIFA has to offer today. But right now, who is our sponsor for today's podcast?
So today's sponsor is Life Happens with Insure Your Love. We're still in the Insure Your Love month. We still have 2 weeks left. And of course, today is President's Day. So we've got a very special guest going with that theme. And we've got Robert Miller, who's one of our past national presidents.
Okay. El Presidente. So with no further ado, Suzanne, would you introduce our guest for today?
Yep. So Robert, I never remember what year you were president, but it was before my time at NAIFA. I've just heard that time. Was it 2016?
It's very easy to remember because I became president at the 10th anniversary of 9/11.
Oh, so that's very easy to remember. So Robert is originally from New York. And so I'm sure we'll hear about some of his origins, but we're happy to have him. Robert has stayed involved in NAIFA, being on the governance committee, and we tap him and pull him out of retirement every now and again when we need some wisdom and some counsel and some great insight. So he's our guest of today, Chris.
They're wonderful. Mr. Robert Miller, welcome to the one and only Advisor Today podcast that can be seen all over the country and heard all over the country because we are now on numerous sites and also on all the streaming platforms. So welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Suzanne. Good to be here.
So it is President's Day in the United States, and you happen to be a past president of our wonderful association. So we'll start with the idea of leading an association. Let me ask a question. You had a chance to lead NAIFA during a period of time. What would you say was the most challenging thing for you to do as a leader during your leadership times along the way?
Wow. That is a good question. So I would say the most challenging thing I had to deal with was the fact that during the day that I became president, we actually ran for office. So we had to build up. We had a first run for trustee, and we then had a run for the executive committee, and then we ascended to the presidency. So people had a number of years to understand the way I thought. And yet when I became president, I realized that nobody actually believed I would try to do the things that I said I would try to do. And if I had to make a general statement, the thing I found out when I was president of NAIFA is NAIFA itself did not want to be great. NAIFA wanted to stay the way it was. And it was very change resistant. And my attitude is if you don't change and adapt to the world around you, you will slowly but ineluctably go into a downward spiral that will end to non-existence. And so I worked really hard. I had already had my retirement plan in place the year I became NAIFA president. So I actually spent 24 hours a day on NAIFA. I remember one time it was the middle of the night, and I used to spend one all-nighter a week answering questions that were directed to me. And one time I answered a question at about 4 a.m, and then the next day I got back an answer saying, I hope the idiot who wrote me the answer to my question at 4 a.m. is not the same Robert Miller who's the president of NAIFA. So my whole aspiration for NAIFA was different than NAIFA's aspiration for itself. And that was very, very frustrating to deal with. And in fact, many of the past presidents were leading the resistance as to why NAIFA shouldn't change.
So let's stay in there. Let's stay in that space. So now you're in a let's call it a challenging space, right? To lead because you're not given all the cards and all the support. So what advice would you give to someone if they find themselves in a unique situation like that? Because you had to pivot, you had to do something. You couldn't just sit there and do nothing. So
that is correct.
What was the mindset, and then what were some of the things that you did to position yourself to have success during your tenure?
The mindset was I was stupefied, but I realized that I couldn't sit there for the year being shocked. So I did several things. One, during our board meetings, I literally did not talk. I would open up the meeting and I'd talk about what we want to do, and I never said another word for hours. I would just listen and give everybody a chance to talk about what I was proposing to do with NAIFA. And actually, you can confirm this because Tom Cothran, our current president, was on that board. And he will tell you that I didn't say a word. All I did was listen. So after listening to everybody and waking Terry Headley up literally at 3 a.m. all the time, I came to the conclusion that we had to form a blue ribbon task force made of a variety, representing all aspects of NAIFA. So I put 2 past presidents as the head of the task force. We selected people who were YATs. We selected people who weren't on the board at all. And we selected a few trustees. And the idea of the Blue Ribbon Task Force was to take what I had proposed and make it more palpable through all this various representation to the NAIFA Federation at large. And we had any number of meetings, and I couldn't get the Blue Ribbon Task Force to come to where I was. So my charge for them was, why don't you take where I am, churn it up, make it into sausage as possible, so we have something to present to the NAIFA Federation. And once again, I shut my mouth and just let them do their work. Now, most people think that all I did was try to strong-arm people, but the reality is, in all these meetings, I almost did nothing except lay out a plan and let them. And it was difficult at times because a lot of times they were, telling me how far I was trying to go. The Federation couldn't do this, it couldn't do that. So it took a lot for me to stay quiet, but I did. So when it was all said and done, to cut to the chase, we had a proposal. We had a number of proposals that were brought forth by these 2 past presidents who were the leaders of the committee. And I brought it to the NAIFA board, and we kind of all agreed on going. I led every single person, yay or nay. And the majority was yay. Most of the people were yay. But NAIFA is a political organization. Mm-hmm. And as some of these people started going out to the locals and the states, they were getting tremendous pushback. The execs were all against it. One of the past presidents, I'm not going to say names, but one of the past presidents who actually brought the compromise proposal idea to the Blue Ribbon Task Force that it accepted, went to some of the other past presidents, got pushback, and then came out against the proposal that he actually was instrumental in bringing forth. They brought it to the American College, and at that time, the head of the American College used their TV network, so one of our esteemed past presidents could get on that TV and destroy the process. So by the time we got to the convention, I had received so many threats that we actually were talking about putting metal detectors before people entered. So the actual meeting took place in Las Vegas, and Tom Curry was the person who was doing the presentations. Again, I just stood there, and singularly, every single presentation we brought forth was defeated. So it was a very frustrating period of time. And frankly, Robert Miller got over it in about 24 hours because I have a lot to do. There's a lot of things pulling at me. And I knew I was pretty much retiring from the industry. I've always promised Diane I'd come back and lobby, and I've always kept my NAIFA, my IFA PAC money flowing. And if they've asked to do something, I've done it. But ultimately, I believe that leaders in the past should keep quiet and let the leaders of the present focus in. And while NAIFA over the 12 or 13 or 14 years since I've been president has made stabs at modernizing, and they have to a degree, they've been able to spread out the workforce and save money so everybody doesn't have to be in the DC area. NAIFA's really never recovered from that. And it's going to take a very charismatic, dynamic leader to overcome the tears of the organization and the fact that people start comparing the NAIFA tears to the government. So it becomes, the whole issue transformed from, I definitely wanted to nationalize the organization a lot more than it was. And only because of branding and other things, we needed to have everybody on the same page, which we weren't. In those days, there were about 65,000 members, and the states and locals were definitely resistant to change. But I understand that that's still the case.
So let's talk about the opportunity, right? The lights and the love and everything we've got that we've built so far. There is a ways to go to get to where we need to be. So what are some of the things that people that are listening to our podcast, if they're leading a local, an affiliate, or even just themselves, what are some of the things that they can do today, now, so that they can move the needle, like you're saying, for the organization?
Another great question. Well, the first thing I used to tell people, don't get actively involved in NAIFA unless your business is solid. A CEO of any company will listen to people who produce. They're not going to listen to people. You're not going to have their ear unless you're doing a lot of business that makes them listen to you. So it pains me to even think that we still are dealing with locals and states and all this stuff. But the first thing NAIFA has to do is they have to realize that they're not doing enough running around the country, talking to companies and telling NAIFA story. But NAIFA also has to figure out what is the NAIFA story to tell these people once you get in the door. And we don't have enough people coming up from below who are successful enough to make a dent on the national scene. So I would encourage you to go back to your initial question, is NAIFA has to do a better job of encouraging its members to be great producers, no matter what they're doing, whether they're asset managers, whether they're insurance people, whether they're P&C people who also come into the insurance world, the life insurance world. They have to be successful producers first.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you something, it crosses lines. So if you're a successful producer, it means you're a go-getter. I mean, I know when I came into the business, I was second generation. My father told me, Robert, you're great at studying and getting A's and getting high SAT scores, but you don't know anything about the world. You lived in an ivory tower. And if you want to do this, go out and do it, but don't come to me. So thanks a lot, Dad. And it was difficult. And I struggled like everybody else. I was the worst producer in my freshman class, but it killed me to be so bad at something. And I am propelled to succeed at no matter what I do. And within 7 years, I sold the largest insurance case nationally that AIG ever had. Now, granted, I was kind of a New York Life person, but they didn't have the products that I really needed to do what I needed to do. So get people successful on the local level, then they will be motivated enough, and they're the kind of people who are going to seek out the representatives, build relationships. We're in a relationship business. Why can't NAIFA form relationships with the right people as an organization? Drives me absolutely out of my mind. Crazy.
It takes courage. It takes courage, right? It takes courage in getting out of your comfort zone to do that. And
how are you going to be successful unless you look? I eventually ended up with 8,000 clients, and I was calling people from the white pages when I started. I mean, you have to just be it's more than courage. You have to look yourself in the mirror and understand what you can do well and what you can't do well. I was very much an introvert. I knew I couldn't be an introvert and survive. I went out and took an acting class so I could learn how to get out of my own skin and be myself in front of people. And for me, that meant taking all this knowledge and all these books that I've read and somehow being able to translate all that knowledge into being able to speak eloquently about what I was doing. And it wouldn't always be about insurance. It could be, philosophically about life. It could be, I used to come up with all sorts of crazy things in my interviews, but it was me. It was uniquely me. Most people are not going to quote Leo Strauss in an interview. Most people are not going to talk about when they were reading Martin Heidegger and what they know about existentialism. But somehow that came naturally to me, and that was the way I did it. I'm not saying anybody else should do it that way, but that was what was natural for me. So you have to find your natural comfort zone. You have to be comfortable with yourself. You have to realize it's a business of rejection. Geez, I used to get 100 rejections a week. Now it does become easier because once you start developing a clientele and you do a job for them, but NAIFA as an organization has to rise up like that.
So I'm going to dig into that a little bit, right? So successful producers, right? Okay, so let's talk about that. So there's the Forum 400. There is a bunch of different, there's MDRT. There's a series of different, what I would call winning all-star type of games, right? Where producers come together for the purpose of growing, learning new techniques, and then going out and just being absolute superstars in their business. When you think about the leaders within, as a successful producer yourself, right? Because I know you would say, I've done my due diligence too, Robert Miller. See, you've written some business. See, I don't have the numbers, but you give me long enough, I'm gonna get the numbers, right? I'm gonna know. I won't know exactly.
I'm not gonna get the numbers. I mean, I could shock you.
But I'll tell you what my coach told me. He told me, he said one day, he said, at the end of the day, Chris, you may go out and score 50, but you're only as good as your last game, right? Yeah. And so that means that at the end of the day, you kept working, you kept doing the deal. You wrote a case like that. Let's say you wrote that case. What made you and propelled you to keep going after the case was written? Because I know a lot of people listening to this was like, 150 million. Oh my God, I'm done. Why did you keep going, and what motivated you to keep going? I think people need to hear things like that.
Well, to me, I worked really hard for about a year on that case. I had to hire an actuary company. There are a lot of things that went into that. And it wasn't even my idea. I took it from a study group I had in New York City, and I ran with it. But the next day, I woke up and I felt like I had nothing. Yeah, I was always motivated by looking forward. So none of that mattered. Once it was done, it was a canceled check. I put it away. Didn't change my life. I still lived in a very humble apartment. And I just went to work the next day and kept doing what I was doing the day before that ended. It was great. But, this is where my father also played a role in this because he was against the case from day one. He thought I'd be wasting my time and end up with nothing. So when it was over, he said, now get your ass back to work. Do what you should be doing that led you to the case. It's always good to have that World War II hard nose right behind you, too. And, it's interesting. He didn't participate in any of it because, we weren't really a merged group at that point. I got it happened in my 7th year in the business. So I had a whole lot of runway ahead of me to keep going. So, it was very easy. It was actually easier than you think. By that time, I was trained to grind and push ahead. And so the next day was just like any other day. I went out, I made calls, I made appointments, and I started talking about the things I was talking about, the day before and the day before that. And I lost my share of big ones. They've blown up in my face too.
I think
that I learned not to start counting your money before it comes.
And even after you get it, you can't count it, right? Because you got to look forward to the next opportunities.
Well, you also can lose it in divorce. So, I've been remarried for a long time, but that divorce was very costly. So anyway.
So there are challenges along the way that could change, but you kept going. You mentioned the fact that
okay, wait, Chris, stop right there. Okay. You win, let's say you were on the court of Michael Jordan, right?
Yep.
And Michael Jordan has a great game. I mean, when he was at Madison Square Garden, he used to love annihilating my team, the Knicks. What did he do the next day? He went to practice.
Of course.
Not to say any of us are like Michael Jordan, but if you want to be great at something, you just wake up and you keep doing what you're doing, which led you to be great in the first place. Mm-hmm. So that's what you do. It's easy. It really is.
So, but there's dedication. I've actually gone around to some of the NAIFA chapters, some of the larger ones, and I participated in the cohorts, and I did a call on the difference between a commitment and an interest. And most people are very interested in success versus committed to it. And there's a big difference, right? And you're committed to very few things. You start making commitments versus these lobbying interests. And so part of this is the idea that you were committed not only to NAIFA, but you were committed to excellence in your endeavor. Mm-hmm. And that's what led the combination of those things. Not only it might not have led you to the case, but it led you to the opportunity of being more likely to find a case like that because of the discipline, because of all the no's you got, because of all those things. It's like me playing basketball. It's like me playing basketball. I actually scored on Michael Jordan before, but at the end of the day, it's like, hey, we go to practice, we got to go back down to the other end of the floor. Like you forget it that quick. They say the greatest shooters in the NBA have a short memory. Why? Because you're going to miss more than you make. And so part of that is the discipline. So if I'm trying to change my behavior, I'm out there in NAIFA land, I'm trying to change my behavior. I say, I want to be more like Robert Miller, Chris Gaines. I want to be like those guys. And I want to become more disciplined with my behavior. What are some of the things that you would advise people to do to help them just think more linear or more narrow focused on accomplishing a task and being more disciplined?
It's a great question. And I love the way you worded it. So I think it's a whole life commitment. So what I mean by that is I was disciplined in every aspect of my life. So I ran 85 miles a week for 25 straight years. Never missed. That kept me that kept me very grounded and disciplined. Everything I did had a purpose. I always considered NAIFA a job. It was not where I was going to make my best friends. I happened to make friends, but that was not my goal of being involved with NAIFA. My goal was to make the organization strong enough to represent our industry so we could be a strong industry in the way we help the American people. So I think you have to be disciplined in all aspects of your life. You can't be undisciplined in your everyday life and all of a sudden become disciplined in your office. At least I couldn't. So for me, it was everything. So for instance, I decided I wasn't going to eat red meat 30 years ago because it affected my running and never ate red meat again. It was discipline. I decided in the 80s I would stop drinking because I didn't like being around people who were acting silly and goofy. So I stopped drinking. I mean, I was a college student. I enjoyed myself. So I stopped. It's in every aspect of your life. At least for me, it was. So if I said I was going to do something, I did it because that's just the way I led my life in all aspects. Period.
So what I'm hearing is you have to be committed to self first before you can project it outwardly. You were committed to the things that made you, and you were committed to those in a way that you did not compromise those things. And that then allowed for you to trust that, my coach used to say, trust the process. Trust the process, right? The idea, Suzanne has a son that plays college sports. I played college sports and professional sports. You've done a lot of things. And so that discipline that's necessary, the work ethic that's necessary, and the commitment, the combination of those things is not, you don't learn those in a book. If you don't learn commitment in a book, you may read about it, but you have to go out and you have to execute on it. So let's change gears. So your journey started I know you mentioned you were at New York Life did you share with us your journey in the financial service industry? So did you start as an agent at New York Life, or were you a broker?
Yeah. Well, to put it into context, I had grown up around very famous New York Life insurance agents. So Ben Feldman and Stan List past J&R. Their names aren't as big as they once were, but certainly Ben Feldman was a giant in the industry. And the day that I signed my contract, it was a strange coincidence, but they were all there. Well, Stan lived in New York, but Ben Feldman happened to be in town. And my father arranged a lunch for me with Ben Feldman, Stan List, pretty much the day I signed my contract. And Ben Silver, who was very well known in New York Life, not as widely well known as the other two. And they told me that in order to be successful, I had to change my entire, essence. I had to get out of the ivory tower. I couldn't just be reading philosophy books. And I heard them, but I didn't take it seriously. And then they told me that I had to give back to the industry if I ever made it. And I think they had their doubts as to whether I was going to make it or not. So I signed my contract with New York Life in, I think it was basically March 1st, 1983 or 82. I don't remember which year. I think it was 82, actually. And I was put in the bullpen with everybody else. I was very scared to call any of my friends because at that point in time, I still knew at it, but I was embarrassed. I'd gotten very sick and I spent 2 years recovering. That led to me changing my life and trying this out. If I hadn't gotten sick, I never would have tried it in the first place. So, so there I was calling the white pages for 1 year. And obviously didn't work very well. And the manager called me into my office and said, Robert, you might be smart, but you don't have a clue of how to sell insurance. And he goes, you know how to do this, you know how to do that. Remember, in those days, we had to we're talking about algorithms to get underwritten. We were carrying around rate books about this thick. And in front of a client, you literally had to sit there and figure out mathematically. Well, anyway, before every interview I went out on, and there weren't many, but anytime I did go out, I was sick. I literally had to go to the bathroom and get sick before I met the prospect. And generally it didn't work out too well. So I think my first year, I did under 12,000 in commissions, which might have set a new record for awfulness. And my whole class did much better than me. By the third year, none of them were in the business, and I was starting to move upward. And I have to say, two things changed me. One, our manager decided that I should take an LUTC class. I never became an LUTCF. I came into the industry with a lot of graduate degrees, so I knew a lot. But I didn't really, I did graduate school at a pretty elite university, and I just didn't think the American college had anything for me to offer. So the LUTC class was very interesting because that year, the person teaching it became the leading agent for their company. And so he was taking us on that journey for us. And he put me in touch with two people who basically probably saved my career, Harry and Roger Phillips. I have no idea. I don't know if any of them are with us, but they were really big producers in the day. They were associated with M Financial and all these other things that I was just starting to learn about. I never personally joined M Financial, but I certainly knew a lot of M Financial people. And the Phillips brothers, they taught me how to be aspirational in the way I wanted to be. I knew very quickly I can never be an insurance person like my father. I didn't have the temperament, the personality, could not do it. I wasn't going to write 10 cases a week and write 370 cases a year. Just wasn't in my DNA. So I realized through LUTC, I had to find another way to do it if I was going to succeed. And this guy really helped me discover the other me. And so when I started putting that together, and God bless the Phillips brothers, I could call them anytime and they would help me. I was always curious about how did they get to these companies? What kind of magic were they using? Why were these people selling these huge things? And in the company I was with, they wanted me to sell, $100,000 whole life policies. So I had no interest in that. But the idea of being able to go into these companies and come up with ideas that were both challenging, and so they challenged me both intellectually and they challenged me physically. So I tried to put it together. So that's where I was able to combine all this graduate school work that it did and all the insights I gained into all sorts of things, and translate that to the companies I represented. So the Phillips brothers and LUTCF changed my mentality. It took about 3 years to do it. But what happened in the third year is I started getting confident in who I was, what I was doing. And when I got confident in that, it allowed me. Now, remember, I was at a graduate school in New York City that produced a lot of people that went to the elite law firms, elite accounting firms, Wall Street, all of that. So I started calling them up. And instead of prospecting for business, I would say, look, I have some great ideas that I think would be interesting to some of your clients in your law firm. Now, eventually they all became clients, but that's not what I was doing at first. I wanted to meet the companies they were doing outside legal work with. If there was an accounting company, I wanted to meet the people they were doing the books with. If it was a Wall Street person, I wanted to know where their weakness in their benefit package was. And I did all of that stuff before I turned it all back on them and went, boom, boom. Now I need you guys to become clients, and here's why. So I didn't even ask. By that time, I was getting pretty confident. I said, at least to the people I knew and the friends of mine, I said, okay, you guys need to start taking this seriously. And I started telling them what they had to do, because no matter how smart they were, none of them had a clue about insurance. So,
Yeah.
And I was testifying on Graham Leach Bliley. I testified in front of the Senate Banking Committee. So I started to really understand all the ins and outs of all these rules and regulations. And one of the things I started really using as I got more active in NAIFA, and I don't understand why people don't do this more, but when you're presenting either to a client or a business or a corporation, I don't understand. You have to understand what differentiates you from the person before you and after you. So it's going to be several things. It's going to be your knowledge. It's going to be the way you carry yourself and how confident you are that you are the person to help this company. And I used my NAIFA. I would say I am also active in NAIFA, which is our industry organization. So if you need something done on Capitol Hill, I'm your person. I know 100 senators and Congress people from testifying. So for instance, when New York Life came to me, because they became a big client of mine more than anything else. They became a big COLI client of mine. But when New York Life came to me and said, they sat me down, we need the New York caucus to support this thing we're doing. I got the New York caucus together from the Congress to get them to listen. I didn't promise they would support New York Life. I got them in the door to listen. So when I got a bunch of people from every major Wall Street company together, they wanted to hear a chairman of the board speak. So I said, well, you remember when I did this for you and how that worked out, and you guys were able to enter, be able to do things you couldn't have done before that? I need you to come down tonight and talk about why New York Life's not a mutual holding company, why it's staying why isn't it becoming a mutual holding company and staying a mutual company? Because the Wall Street people were interested. When you go back into that time, that was a big, big issue. And after that speech, I think I must have made $5 million. And I have to tell you, before I came down to Florida for a few months to our house down here, I had lunch with that guy, and we were laughing about all that stuff because he said, I know, I made you all this money, but you never took me out to lunch then. I said, well, I thanked you. He goes, all right, but, he remembered the seminar, and he remembered me going back after him and said how much money, how many commissions he led me to. Tell you, no work, but it all came from connections and putting it all together. So that was my way of entering this business that was able to put it on my playing field, that combined my talents with what I could get done.
Very art of war.
Answering your questions.
No, you did. Well, the other thing, you haven't said this, you're gonna have to
edit all this and make it sound coherent.
No, but you gamified it to your own, in your own head, right? I mean, you made it into something that therefore you weren't ashamed of. You could put it up to another level and escalate it up intellectually. So it was challenging to you. So you're actually into it. But what you didn't say, which I always often wonder why more people don't do this, you put it into a business consultative approach. I mean, you're using business consulting to come in and solve business problems. You're not coming in with a product, right? You're looking at it holistically.
Never talk product.
Right.
Ever,
you didn't need to.
Ever. Even with individuals, I always talked about problems. I always was looking for them to tell me. I always found out where the weak spot was and then how I could help their weak spot. You have to be able to listen to what they say, and then you have to be able to ask probing questions. And I never would script myself because I always needed that ability to just be able to go wherever I needed to go. And I had the confidence that I could do that. So, it was a 3 to 4 year growing process. But once I grew it was like a rocket ship forward. I was able to get all
Wow.
that together. I had the confidence to be able to sit in that C-suite and go to toe with these people. And frankly, that's what NAIFA has to do.
When you look at that's a heck of a run. You did it differently, but I just keep going back to this thing I keep hearing you say is that you were committed to excellence.
It's
You were
even more than
to
that,
the
Chris. I had to be excellent. I couldn't accept it. I think it was a step beyond even commitment. If I looked at myself in the mirror and I wasn't successful, I'd be miserable. I had to, it was an innate drive that I'm sure you can understand because you've been around so many successful and brilliant athletes. But there was a drive that, okay, this is my career. And I had to be what I had to be. I don't know how else to describe it. It's one of those things that I think either you have or you don't have.
right.
But I didn't have it at the beginning, but boy, I had it. And I wanted to be the best. And I wanted to do it in a very low-key way.
Mhm.
I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to be front and center. I'm not going to knock any other industry organizations, but it wasn't my thing to sit there and talk about how great I am. I didn't necessarily feel like telling my story. All I wanted to do was tell the NAIFA story so that we could be supported in Congress. So it wasn't only that I was driven to do this. This is the first time I actually am really ever talking about this publicly,
Mhm.
or even mentioning that case. I mean, one time I was at AIU meeting, those AIG lawyers came up to me and goes, you're not getting any paid anymore in that case, but we certainly are. I said, well, I'm glad you guys are still making money off that case. But I mean, it was a necessity. I mean, it was like breathing. I had to do it. And my father, I don't think he recognized the Frankenstein monster I had turned into. The funny thing is when I became NAIFA president, Suzanne, I think you know this, but they used to have this, there were 3,000 people at these meetings, and they do a thing about your life.
Yeah.
And they would come to your house and they'd videotape you. And, so my father and me, I didn't realize this was happening at the time because I was being interviewed in my office, in our house in New Canaan. He was being interviewed in the living room. And as it turns out, we told the same story about the day he came into my office just to see if I wanted to have dinner with him. And I was sitting there with my hand, my head in my hands. And he said, what's wrong? I said, I'm not talking about it. You know how you tell your father, I don't want to talk about it. So I said, no, not talking about it. None of your business. My problem. Stay away from me. And he goes, okay. He goes, does it have something to, of course he didn't listen to me. He goes, have something to do with anything that happened today? All right. I did. Somebody really was nasty on the phone to me. I didn't like it. He goes, man, you're a coward. He wasn't even empathetic. He goes, you stayed in a bubble your whole life and you were always good at what you did, but you never went outside that bubble. Now you're out in the world. It gets tough. You're sitting there with your hand, holding your head up. And he goes, I'm ashamed you're even my son. And he stormed out of there. And so, I said that SOB. And I said, I'll show him. And I literally stayed until I made 2 appointments. I made one $50,000 term sale. I didn't get the other one. So I took the application and his office, we were in different places. I went over to his office. I took the application and I threw it in his face. It's true, absolutely the way it happened. I said, don't ever call me a coward again. I'm going to show you what I can do in this goddamn business. But we essentially told the same story of little, in each of our own ways, but I don't know where that thing is. I don't have it. But if you ever go back, Suzanne, and listen to that one thing as to what they do when you become president. You'll hear the same story, both told from different perspectives.
Well, that's interesting. You know, what's interesting is the fact, and I just want to highlight this, is that you've said it a couple of times and I actually listened to you, is that you actually listened to not only yourself, but you listened to people so then you could solve the issue or the issues that they were having. When you were president, you listened. If you noticed that you said that, I don't know if you realized you said that. You said, I didn't really talk at the meetings. I listened.
Yeah, listened.
And you continue to listen. So one of the things that I'm hearing consistently is we do a lot of this a lot of times and less of the action behind that. And we need to listen first, and we need to have actions that swiftly follow after that. It sounds like that's been a continuous kind of mode of operandi for you as you've kind of had gone through your journey.
Yeah, I think, well, I think that if you don't listen, I mean, look, people love to talk about themselves. So if you're in an interview and you're talking about yourself, you're not going to make a sale. I mean, you ask one question and shut up. And even if there's silence, you go, well, you don't talk. Every time you ask the question, you shut up and hear what they have to say. You don't interrupt them until they're done. They don't get halfway through what they're saying. You go, oh yeah. I know. No, shut up. Wait till they're done talking, and then you answer them back. You'll get a lot further in life when you do that.
That's a good kind of, I would say, principle that people can learn from. I think, if you're telling, you're not selling, right? And at the end of the day, seek first to understand and to be understood, right? And so part of that is you've encompassed that. You obviously have had success in your career. You've had success at NAIFA. Question I have for you is, what's been your hardest challenge, your hardest struggle? What has been your hardest struggle? It might have been your relationship with your dad. It might have been it doesn't matter what it is. What has been the hardest struggle or challenge for Robert Miller that you really just, Chris, I struggled with that?
Well, there's not just one, there's multiple.
Just give me one. Just give me one. Other than the Knicks not winning other than the Knicks continuously getting beat by the Bulls. I mean, I understand, like the Knicks, we'll talk about that in the end, but that's a fact.
That's a horrible struggle. Hey, Chris, I've lived 50 years waiting for another championship. I don't have 50 more years left. So the hardest struggle really was, for me, the hardest struggle was understanding my father in life. I was very close to my father, but the hardest thing was to understand him. We were very different. He's a very gregarious, people-loving person. When I grew up during the 60s, I was an angry, protesting, everything's wrong with the world kind of a person. So obviously we clashed. He loved me, but we clashed. I wasn't sure I loved him at the time, but we were at each other's throats many times. So as we started, when I came into the profession, it was very difficult because there was a part of me, even though I knew it was in my best interest, that was angry at him, that he made me go off on my own when it could have been a little easier. But I will say this, if he didn't do that, I never would have survived and made it in the business. So, but that came from learning. So I would say when I got divorced, and I really had to examine how I got to this point in my life. Why was I getting divorced? And why wasn't my relationship with my father closer than it is? So I actually went into therapy to understand these things about myself. What is it about me What is it about other people? I'm not embarrassed to say it. And it changed my life in terms of, one, my relationship with my father for the last umpteen years, I don't know, 30 years of his life was unbelievable. It was great. And even to the point where I became much more accepting of him. So when I was doing my past president speech at NAIFA, in my immediate past president speech, I wrote an incredibly angry speech, just knocking the industry. You could look back on some of the interviews I gave about the industry in NAIFA and how it doesn't want to be the best that it can be. I mean, I really, really went after it. So my speech was angry. My father said to me, Robert, do not give that speech. I said, well, the hell that. I'm giving that speech. I'm the one who suffered through the death threats. I'm the one who got all the stuff thrown at me. Given the speech, God damn it. And so it was about 10 minutes before I was going on. And at the last second, I tell the teleprompters, don't put that speech on. I couldn't get my father's voice out of my head. And don't put that speech in the teleprompter. It's going to confuse me, but I'm going to go up there and give a different speech. What do you mean you're going up there to give a different speech? I said, don't worry, I can do it. I've been giving speeches all over the country. I know what I'm doing, but I have to say, and I gave the speech my father would have wanted me to give. So overcoming that relationship was the greatest challenge I had in my life and the greatest pleasure I had in my life. And out of that therapy session, I also ended up meeting my wife, the best woman I ever met in my life. And you know how I met her? We went to the same college, and I was out with the alumni director of giving. And we just at lunch. And when you're in our business, you can prospect for anything. These are very translatable tools that I use all the time. So, for instance, I'm in charge now of rebuilding the IA department at Emerson College, which is where I'm on the executive committee of the board of trustees. But, I can prospect still. I haven't lost that edge. So we're at lunch and he goes, how's it going? How's dating life? I said, well, I'm kind of with this woman, but it's not going anywhere. Anyway, long story short, he mentioned the name of this person and said, well, I think she's single. I said, well, do you know anybody who's single? Yeah, I could call on. And he mentioned this woman. And I said, okay, well, when you see her next, why don't you see if she wants to go out, if she's single, if she's seeing anybody. But for some reason, in a twist of fate, I just went back to my office and called the New Canaan information in those days. And sure enough, her number was listed. I called her up. She had no idea who the hell I was. So I said, I'm a friend of so-and-so's. She called me back. We talked. I said, well, you probably want to know why I want to speak to you. She said, I want to ask you out for dinner. And that was it, 25 years ago. So simple twist of fate. So overcoming that challenge.
Always be asking for those referrals.
Well, but overcoming that challenge of building my relationship with my dad also led to me meeting my wife. The same thing led to both instances. I think if it's not my greatest challenge, it's the challenge I'm most proud of overcoming. Because that relationship was just priceless for the last 30 years of our lives in his life.
And I know one thing that Robert has said to me before that's always stuck with me, Robert, is you said that the success you feel of this marriage is that both of you came into the marriage as fully formed people. And I've never forgotten that. You need to be those fully formed people and accepting of who you are and who she is. And that's been one of your secrets of success.
Well, I was being introduced to all of these very pretty young women, and I'm no looker. I had a personality for sure, but I wanted to find someone who'd been through the ringer, knew what divorce was like, knew what raising kids. I I wanted somebody who lived. I don't want to be telling him, well, the Vietnam War was this. And I wasn't there to educate. I was there to find a partner. And I found one.
Awesome. All right, Suzanne, we
Yep.
are. Robert, I'd love to keep talking to you. I'm sure NAIFA Nation wants to, I'm sure they might have seen you around. Those who don't know, Robert Miller, he is usually one of I'll just say he's dressed for success. His swag is usually on point. So if you see him, he's the guy that comes in, and he may not have a suit on, but he has on some. So you can tell that he's got on some gear, and vibe is definitely unapologetic. So with that being said, Suzanne, do you have anything before we take Robert Miller to the lightning round?
Time for the lightning round.
All right, Robert Miller, if we had sound effects, we don't have a budget for sound effects, but if we had them, we would be here like lightning, right? We don't have a budget for sound effects, but that's okay. So with that being said, this is a lightning round. It's not a hot seat. It's just simply, I'm gonna ask you questions, whatever comes top of mind, that's how you answer. It's not a deep thoughtful conversation. It's just literally exactly what it is. If you watch any of the other podcasts, it's literally hit it and let's go, right? Okay, so I'm going to ask you questions, and we'll start off things that you really know about, right? And so I noticed in your picture, if everyone's looking, I noticed that those are either chess boards or checker boards on behind you. Which one is that? And do you play chess or checkers?
I was a pretty serious chess player at one time.
Are you good?
I was.
You was.
I
Okay.
kept up with. I was. I spent quite a few years really studying it. Yeah, I was pretty good, but
Okay.
not. I don't play it anymore. But
Okay.
my whole office is designed with all sorts of game things, an antique globe, a few pieces of artwork, picture of me on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, pictures of my wife. It's a great office. I love being in it.
Awesome. Mr. Robert Miller, where are you located at today?
I'm located at the Windsor Club in Vero Beach, Florida.
He's in Florida. Okay, got it. See how easy those questions are? You kind of know them. You don't have to think about them. Okay, here we go. So, Robert Miller, from New York, Chicago pizza or New York pizza?
Oh, come on. New York pizza, man. It's not even a question. Do you even doubt that answer? Totano's and Giuliana's and, oh, man, don't even.
I got to ask the question. All right. The Knicks or the Brooklyn Nets?
Oh, the Knicks. Brooklyn Nets. Is there a team in Brooklyn?
All right. The Mets or the Yankees, and why?
1959, my father took me for my first New York Yankee game. I saw Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford and the bright lights. I couldn't believe they could light up a field at night. I learned all the lore and the history. I'm a season ticket holder for the New York Yankees.
Awesome.
So, Chris, if you're in town and want to sit 4 rows behind the dugout, I'm your man. Call me up.
Okay. I will take you up on that one. Just so you know, Suzanne. Suzanne, don't go when I'm going. I'm going to the Yankees.
Tag out.
I've heard the new stadium is absolutely stacked. I have a couple baseball players that are in MLB, and they're like, that stadium's unbelievable. All right, the last 2 questions. Advice your dad gave you that now resonates with you. The best advice that you remember.
Never stop trying.
Never stop trying. Wonderful. Last question. NAIFA Nation is listening. What are your parting words for NAIFA Nation that you would say that everyone in NAIFA needs to hear?
Working for NAIFA was something that made me very proud. And I got a lot of things done at NAIFA. I testified a lot, but I will say this, the proudest moment I've ever had in NAIFA was talking and eulogizing my friend Terry Hadley. I consider that my crowning NAIFA achievement. with all the other things I did, being able to introduce my friend Terry to other people, that's my proudest moment to NAIFA Nation.
Awesome. Awesome. Suzanne.
Yeah.
Robert Miller, any parting words? If not, we're going to go back to Suzanne, and then I'm going to close this podcast.
No questions, Suzanne? I mean, come on.
No, I thought it was your parting words. Do you have any parting words there, Robert? I would say, Robert, what's your favorite quote? What's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote?
Yeah, quote.
It's funny, Suzanne, he's kind
Let
of...
us go then, you and I, while the evening spread across the sky.
Say it one more time.
Let us go then, you and I, while the evening is spread across the sky. It's from the love song of J.R. for Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, and it actually is sitting behind my desk. I have it everywhere I go. So that poem sat in my office. That poem sits in my office here. So that's it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, Suzanne, do you have any parting words for NAIFA Nation before we close?
Thank you, Robert. As always, always a pleasure. Always enjoy picking your brain. Thank you for all your support of NAIFA.
Mr. Robert Miller, those, rewind this, take some notes. I took some notes on our guest, Robert Miller, our past president. Thank you so much. So this is a message from NAIFA Nation. Thank you so much for your service. Thank you so much for your dedication. And thank you so much for being a leader. You've paved the way for many people to come behind you and pick up the pace, pick up the pieces, and really to run beyond where you place them at. So thank you so much for your commitment. And those of you who are listening out there in NAIFA Nation, thank you for your commitment and continuing to listen to the #1 podcast at NAIFA Advisors Today, where we uplift, promote, and we support the careers of those of you out there. And for the betterment of the good, as Robert says, we're better, stronger together than we are apart. So we'll see you next week on Advisor Today podcast. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Suzanne. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for NAIFA's Advisor Today podcast series. Make sure to subscribe to get future episodes. And if you're interested in coming on the show, let us know.